First Newsroom 515 event of the year. My name is Kris Conetzkey. I'm the publisher and executive editor for the Business Record. The whole goal of Newsroom 515 is to invite in our members to a little bit more of an intimate group. Sometimes when we do our power breakfast and our economic forecast, you got 300 or 400 people in the audience. The goal here is to bring in a small group so that you get an opportunity to ask some questions and engage with the panelists in a little bit more intimate environment. One of my goals with the Business Record is to make sure that we're turning this into a place where we're bringing in people from the community so that we have the opportunity to get to interact with you, learn about what's going on in your business, and you get an opportunity to meet our staff. You've probably heard me say something to the effect of it's our mission to help you do business better, and this is one of the ways that we're hoping to do that this year and on into the future. Last year, we piloted this series out for the first time. We did 5 events, and it was so successful, and it always sells out really quickly, and we're really excited to be able to continue that this year with the support of U.S. Cellular. U.S. Cellular has signed on to be the sponsor for all 5 of our Newsroom 515 events here in 2020. So to tell you a little bit more about U.S. Cellular is Nick Turley. He's the local sales manager in the area. Here you go, Nick.
Thank you.
Nick, a round of applause.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Like Kris said, I'm Nick Turley, a business area sales manager for U.S. Cellular here in Western Iowa. I lead a sales team that's really focused on business and government customers and ensuring that we are really taking care of folks. We know it's a very competitive landscape that we're in, and we do our best with what we have. We're really excited to partner with Newsroom 515, and we look forward to see what comes with that. If you guys currently work with the provider, have questions, feel free to come find me, and then Ryan and Dave. Dave, if you guys want to wave your hands, those sales guys, come chat us up. We'd love to entertain any questions you have, and we look forward to this relationship.
Thanks, Nick. Appreciate it. Thank you. So, everybody in the room here has a role to play today. Kathy Bolten, our senior staff writer. Kathy, give a big wave. Kathy is our some applause. Thank you. Kathy puts together our commercial real estate e-newsletter each week and does our real estate development reporting. She's going to be asking some questions to get things rolling. But after that, we're going to break down the fourth wall. We're going to open up really quickly for questions from the audience. And that's your opportunity to ask some questions, because what she's going to be doing is she's going to take the conversation from today. She's going to be working to put together an article that's going to appear in the annual real estate magazine. That's going to show up later in April, and we'll unveil that our annual real estate magazine, or our Commercial Real Estate Trends and Issues Forum, that is also in April. So your questions and the things that are on your mind are going to be the thing that helps shape the article that ultimately appears. So I always need somebody to be really brave and ask the first question. I don't see Mike Carver here, so that means I need somebody to be the brave person to ask the first question once Kathy opens it up. We're also going to be taking the video today. Dwayne, give a big wave. Dwayne's our photographer. Many of you, I'm sure, have had your photo taken by Dwayne. He's videoing the conversation today. That'll be available on the website when the magazine publishes as well. And you'll probably see some smatterings of the content that Kathy puts out in some of our other products as well. Before we get started today, you do have one more big job. Can you give a big round of applause for our panelists today? So our goal today is to explore the housing market, and that means there's not enough time here in the next hour for us to get through every topic as it relates to housing, but there's a number of great topics that we've got on tap today. But to start us out, I'm going to have each of you introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about how you relate to housing in the market, and then we'll have Kathy kick things off.
My name's Eric Webster, and I am General Manager of Berkshire Hathaway Home Services First Realty out in West Des Moines, and so we do residential real estate.
I'm Frank Levy, and I'm the president of Newbury Living. We are an apartment developer and manager with history in affordable housing and increasingly in market rate housing. Before I pass the mic, I want to say that we are a U.S. Cellular customer. We have about 125 phones in the field. We're very pleased with the kind of customer service that they give.
Not a plant, I promise.
Nobody is expecting a discount on the next bill. My name's Eric Burmeister. I'm the executive director of the Polk County Housing Trust Fund. We are the organization that does the advocacy work as well as some of the funding work for affordable housing in Polk County.
To talk about Attainable. because affordable tends to mean those people. And I'm going to argue that all of us need attainable housing. We all live in attainable housing. So I think that's, to me, the biggest thing that's facing our industry is understand what that means for our community, what that means, you know, for anybody that's a manager, corporate owner, business owner. You should understand what kind of attainable housing you have for your employees. And so what does that mean in our community? What do we need? Because we know the biggest challenge facing Des Moines is we need bodies. 2% unemployment is a bad thing. We need bodies. And in order to do that, we need attainable housing.
So I think that one of the things in front of us is how do we come together as a region and be thoughtful about our regional housing market. We know that people make housing choices across the region. We know that it's easy to commute from one place to another within our region for where you live and where you work. And so how do we think about these issues as outside of jurisdictional boundaries, because it does cross city lines. And we need to figure out how we can balance supply and demand across the region, not just within one single city.
I would agree with Kris that the conversation is more than just affordable housing, that the conversation we have every day is about housing for all. And that includes affordable housing, but that's about choice for everybody in every piece of the market. The context that we're working in as a suburban community is that the context is sort of what I would call a monoculture of housing that is very similar, that continues and continues. It has its own inertia. But is that what we need? Is that the right suitable housing for everybody? That I think of myself as I live, and I purchased a great house, but it was an available house. So there are available houses in all pieces of most pieces of the market, but that doesn't mean that they're the right house for everybody, and that's different than the affordable conversation at the other end of the spectrum.
I agree with I guess the new definition. We don't talk as much about affordable housing as we did before, but rather just talking about housing in general, because it really is on a continuum and really does make a difference as to the family or household we're talking about. But I think that there are really two big issues that are facing us right now, particularly in light of the workforce housing report that I know we'll talk about a little later. As I told my board, there are two V words. They're value and velocity. And so the first thing that we know is that the population is going to grow very quickly. And so the velocity of building in this region is going to have to be at a rate that is a lot higher than it's been in the past if we're going to meet that demand. And the second is value, which means we're going to have to be building the right product at the right price. And so we're going to have to know what those needs are for this population that's coming in.
From your various perches, I think you see a more macro view than I see. I'm more of a niche guy, and so I'll add to the conversation that there's 3 or 4 major neighborhood transformations that any developers or development services people would want to figure out. One is this move of DMU is going to radically transform the corridor that I'm most focused on right now, is the Ingersoll Grand Corridor. That's one. Our office is by Valley West Mall. Valley West Mall is struggling. There's plans to do that. Then there's a similar thing at Myrtle Hay Mall. And then you've just created a new neighborhood that's going to radically alter the center of gravity in downtown. So those of us who are developing kind of have to figure out what that means for our projects. And then something similar is kind of happening in the East Village. So I'd say I feel like my biggest challenge is to try and be a little bit prescient in one or more of these big sea changes.
From my perspective, from a residential real estate side of things, I see an ever-widening gap between something for a first-time home buyer that would be sort of $220,000 and below. There's a lot more inventory in the $325,000 and above than there is the other way. And new construction is focused on the higher end of things. And we really could use, with the millennial buyer who is very savvy and buying houses and renting rooms, I think that the $100,000 gap between a resale home, average price, and a new construction home is a big issue that faces our community today.
So
So several communities here and across the country are embarking on redeveloping neighborhoods. In some communities, we're seeing the emergence of pocket neighborhoods, smaller houses built on smaller lots. Let's talk a little bit about how you go about redeveloping a neighborhood and sort of what that might look like today. Amber, you want to kick that off?
Sure. So, I mean, I think within the city of Des Moines, a lot of what we're trying to do is reinvent a neighborhood that's already there. So we don't have a lot of land that is vacant that we're trying to develop with new product. And in most of our neighborhoods, the market isn't really strong enough for that product to come in on its own without a lot of incentive or subsidy. So we're starting with what's there now, and how do we upgrade and update those existing homes in a way that make them continue to be attractive in the marketplace, so that hopefully down the road, in the long term, that can support new investment that's coming in a more of a new construction way. I think, there are some places where we do have opportunities to maybe take down or reinvent a particular block or a particular site. And when we can do that, the more that we can start to bring in some more diverse housing types. So, can we get kind of these middle scale buildings? But those are tricky to develop too. So, from our approach, it's really how do we work with what's here and make that marketable, and then how do we add to it from a new product?
So why is it important to redevelop a neighborhood? Anybody?
I would add to that from a municipal perspective, a taxpayer perspective, that we've got infrastructure that's already there. We're going to be maintaining that forever regardless. If we can add density, if we can add tax base to that location, everybody wins. We're going to take care of it forever anyway.
So we're seeing in Des Moines and in the suburbs some creating of new neighborhoods. Let's talk a little bit about how that is going to impact the downtown area with Hubbell's, and we're seeing redevelopment or new neighborhoods in East Village and up by the river, and then we'll just start there and then see where that takes us.
So how's that going to impact the other neighborhoods?
What is the new development? How's that going to impact the areas, and what does that new development look like?
I think twofold. I think we have to understand what the first ring means. We love what we're doing. We love Gray Station, but the reality is, we still are struggling. I mean, we're going to struggle to hit a 2 number that starts. I mean, that's just the reality with new construction. So the beautiful thing about the first ring is as we do redevelopment and we utilize, as Ben indicated, that infrastructure, that helps our community to bring in that kind of housing. So, I think what we talked about kind of as a group, before we started was that continuum, and what Eric talked about is what's critical. And so do we have the ability to do that first ring housing it starts with a 1, and down at Gray Station? No, we don't, because costs are what they are. But how do we as a community bring that in and use that infrastructure? So I think it's to make sure that we have, as Eric alluded to, this community where you can pop in at whatever housing is attainable for you. And so, but it also, we need to understand, what does that urban center look like? How do you have a neighborhood that's walkable, that has that kind of green area that we may not be able to do in some of those neighborhoods that redevelopment, but it allows you to have a different type of neighborhood down here, because we as a community just need lots of all of the opportunity.
You talked about the challenge to redevelop within there for developers. Can you talk a little bit about what some of those barriers are when you are trying to do neighborhood redevelopment within, let's say, north of 235?
Do you want to talk about that, or do you want me to? Yeah, we'll talk about this a lot, but the biggest challenge that we have is 2 things: is costs are going like this. Construction costs last year were 6%, and if you just take that multiplied over the last few years, and here's what unless y'all are getting a 6% raise this year, I love Rick Toxon, but that didn't happen at Hubbell. But you know what I mean? Here's incomes have been like this. Even though we're at 2% unemployment, and we think it should be going like this, but incomes across the board are here. And here's where construction costs are going. And so, regardless of what you're doing, whether you're trying to go into that neighborhood, which is why, you still have gap with the stuff that you're doing, or the downtown stuff, we do not have the ability anywhere in this country to produce housing that works at that price point. And Eric talked about it. We need 220. Well, we can barely build it. And people that come out, and the housing study talks about that, most of those people are going to be below 75. Do the math. Doesn't work.
So to piggyback onto what you just said, the cost per square foot to build a new construction home on average today is about $200, compared to the resale market, which is about $150. So $50 a square foot is a big gap. And what's interesting about what Kris just said, with costs going up 6%, we've seen a year-over-year average stay about the same. So builders are leaving their pricing the same, but taking the hit on the 6% increase. That's what I'm seeing in the numbers.
I think to add another layer to that, part of it is the choices that are available within the region. So part of the reason why it's difficult to redevelop in some of the center city neighborhoods, the urban neighborhoods, is because consumers are preferring to buy, when they can, the new construction out in other parts of the community. And so there's less demand for those inner city neighborhoods over time, and prices tend to fall. And so to get to Kris's point, even renovating a structure that's already there, a home, the cost is higher than the resale value can support. And so we have this funding gap that we're trying to overcome, and a private individual often is going to either choose to not make that investment, in which case conditions then continue to decline, not just for that home, but it starts to spread across the neighborhood. And then it becomes just a much more difficult lift to get the whole neighborhood back to where it needs to be to stay in a healthy condition and functioning in a market way.
A lot of good stuff there to digest. The workforce housing study that was released last May includes some worrisome statistics. 58,000 households in the Des Moines MSA are cost burdened, meaning homeowners and renters are paying more than 30% of their income on housing, which leaves little money for lots of the necessities: healthcare, clothing, food, transportation, entertainment. On top of that, the Des Moines area is expected to add about 100,000 new jobs in the next decade, about half of which will have the annual income of less than $50,000 a year, and another 20% will have an annual income of between $50,000 and $75,000. So the broad question is, how are we going to prepare for the need for the more attainable, affordable workforce housing that's both owner-occupied and rental, and what are the ramifications for not preparing for it? Frank, do you want to kick us off?
Well, again, making a very narrow response as opposed to a broad one, betting on that trend, we've just acquired some older product. We acquired 2 apartment complexes on Grand Avenue, the Imperial and the Grand Prix. They were built in 1966 and 1968, and we're going to renovate them and try and reposition them at a cost of about $15,000 per apartment, and try and get the rents up from the 80, 90 cents per foot to $1.05 a foot. And that will hopefully meet some of the need you're talking about, because it won't be a new construction cost. We did pay dearly for the apartment complexes because cap rates, the investors are it's a very frothy market. We had to pay a lot. But hopefully the trends that you're pointing to will enable that to be a good decision. So we're counting on job growth, population growth, income growth being a good fit for older but upgraded apartments right now.
I think that, okay, I guess not. I think that the issue that we're going to face, and I know that there's some disagreement in the community about what's going to happen, but I think that what we're going to face with this incredible population growth is just simply a increase in the cost of housing across the board, whatever type it is. So you're seeing some of it with my friend Frank here. I noticed, to prove I do read the commercial real estate weekly, what did I see that apartment on Kingman just sold for $250,000 more than what the seller paid for it like 6 or 8 months ago? I mean, you know there's going to have to be price increases and rent increases built in somewhere there. And again, the wages that are being paid are not going to support those kinds of increases. And so then what happens in most markets, and I will argue that it'll happen in Des Moines, is you're going to start to see this constricted demand cause artificial price increases that Please, no, I mean, you can, well, no, but I mean, you'll end up with a supply and demand problem. And so I do think that prices are going to go up, and rents are going to go up, and the price of the existing houses are going to go up, just simply because you'll have more people competing for it. No, Frank, we're buddies. No, we're fine. I understand. I worked in this business for 30 years before I started sitting in a chair like this, but I think that, but I do think that we're going to start to see prices go up, and it's not going to necessarily be because you've got an extra bathroom or you've added onto your house or whatever. It's just simply because of a shortage of supply.
What does that affordable, attainable housing look like for somebody that doesn't want to buy new, that's looking to buy their first home?
So one thing for people in this room is some of the properties that Amber was talking about. If you are an enterprising person and a little bit industrious and maybe slightly handy, you can invest in these properties and do a lot of good in this city. I have a number of our realtors that do invest in single-family rentals, and you can build a nice portfolio, have good control and good renters. In many cases, I'm seeing where the renters actually retire the note for the investor and provide great equity. So I think that is a piece of the solution for sure.
So whose shoulders does it sort of fall on to make sure we do have the attainable, affordable workforce housing? Ben, do you want to start us off there?
And we talked about this a little bit earlier. We talk about it all the time, that it takes everybody, that it's not the developer's problem, it's not the city's problem, it's everybody's problem. And so it's going to take partnerships to figure it out. It's going to take education to figure it out. That in our community, we do talk about housing every day. We're working on what we're calling a housing strategy to try and figure that out a little bit. But it's going to be change, and change is hard, and people don't always enjoy change, but change is coming regardless. So how are we going to accommodate it and make it something that we want? So one of the things that we're working on is just understanding density, and it goes to the monoculture comment earlier about what our suburbs generally look like, but incorporating density is not a bad thing, and it can be small things like reducing lot widths, or it can be having some mixed use or multifamily that can be in a community, but it's part of the equation that I like to look at things through everything we do through an economic development lens too, which is more appealing to people sometimes than a housing discussion. But we hear all the time in our community, I'm sure we all hear this, that we want this or we want that in our community, we want this amenity, we want this restaurant, or how come we don't have that yet? And it takes density to get those things, and trying to correlate those things is the message we're trying to use to get there. We've done a lot of education internally, and our elected officials have a really good understanding now of the ramifications, the change that's coming, what we may need to get to. And then we get to the next pieces of, do we incentivize that? Do we form partnerships with developers to do that? And then educating the rest of our public about why that's necessary.
We've all worked hard to talk about how we reduce the price of housing. There's another half of that equation, and this is where the conversation sometimes gets a little touchy. But the business community is going to have to recognize that there is not enough money, either from the government or from the philanthropic sector, to continue to fill the gap in the cost of housing and wages in this community. And we're not going to come anywhere close to addressing this problem until we start talking more about living wages. And so I'll give you an example. The day after the announcement of that blue project, I don't remember what it is, out in your neck of the woods, Bluebird, Blue Point, Blue whatever.
Project Blue Jay.
Yeah, I said, we're going to bring in 1,500 new workers that make about $30,000 a year. Where are they going to live? We don't have apartments or houses in this town that are affordable to that workforce. Why didn't we say, no, go dial 1-800 someplace else? We don't have the infrastructure here to support the kind of social safety net that it's going to take care of to subsidize housing for those folks. And so we need to be really careful going forward in our planning, because what the workforce housing study tells us is going forward between now and 2038, that is the kind of demographic profile of a workforce we can expect to see, and that's a lot of housing to subsidize, because every one of those houses, whether it be single family or whether it be a new apartment, is going to have some sort of public or charitable subsidy in it. Now
I want to make a call out to someone whose sweatshirt I'm noticing, Kading Construction. Do you work for Kading? See, Kading, with no subsidy, offers a tremendous value, and you can't believe what an attainable rent they achieve in their housing. So there are models of housing that do, with no subsidy, deliver a workforce product. And I admire Kading because I rely upon the low-income housing tax credit program to provide the type of housing that would address that market. But there are developers, and I think Kading is leader amongst them, that can provide, it may not make Architectural Digest, but it's a lot of value. And if you're comparing living in a house with a 1 or 2 car attached garage, usually 2 or 3 bedroom, I think slab on grade, you've got your own house. That's a dream for a lot of people versus an apartment where you can hear your upstairs neighbors, et cetera. So I don't think it's all about, I think subsidy and incentives are important, but I don't think it's always about that. Sometimes I think it's about not being as, touchy about how a project physically looks at the curb. Sometimes I think that's important as well. Is that fair?
So on the residential side, one of the trends that we're seeing is that these savvy millennial home buyers, they're buying houses and renting rooms to their friends. And that is one of the things that we're seeing happening over and over again. And I think it's actually a pretty good trend, because I'm seeing young people buy a $220,000, $250,000 home that might be a 3 or 4 bedroom, and then renting out 2 of those rooms and paying their mortgage using their friends in a good way.
So do we have any questions from the audience?
So Polk County Trust Fund, Housing Trust Fund's Undesign the Red Line exhibit talks about the history of housing and development in Des Moines, and it's an uncomfortable history to face, how certain neighborhoods were not worthy of investment or redevelopment efforts displaced populations, primarily neighborhoods that were primarily people of color, African American, and populations that were people of color, creating our racial wealth gap that we see today all across the country. So I'd like to know, in your areas, what practices do you have in place to prevent repeating those patterns of creating inequity?
Who wants to start?
I want to sell a house to anyone who wants to buy one.
So I don't know that thank you for bringing that up. I don't know that necessarily the undesign is a way to talk about necessarily affordability in this context, but I do believe the process that we talk about in terms of community engagement to discuss what it is that we want our neighborhoods to look like and the folks that we need to have around the table when we talk about solutions and potential solutions to this particular issue of attainable housing, those circles and those tables maybe need to be bigger than they have been in the past. And that when we do make those kinds of policy decisions that impact the housing in our communities, that we ask ourselves, is this particular policy have any unintended consequences that we might not be thinking about right now? Or furthermore, and more specifically, does it actually contribute to mitigating some of the past damage that's been done? Because I think that's one of the ways that we keep all of that top of mind.
Amber, how have you thought about that in terms of some of the neighborhood redevelopment up north of 235? And I'm just curious I know you haven't been at it too long up there, but just curious what you've been learning so far.
Sure. I mean, I think redlining is a difficult thing that happened all over the country at a certain period of time, and the ramifications of that are still rippling into now, and you can feel the effects of that. You can see the effects of that in some neighborhoods and with some populations. I think we really try to, as I said in my previous comment, approach it as we're working with the existing neighborhood, not with the intent to displace the existing neighborhood. And so how can we add value for the people who are already invested there to make sure that they're building equity in their homes, that it is a wealth building proposition to be a homeowner in these neighborhoods over the long run, and that we're helping them protect those investments and feel confident to continue making those investments. I think there are bits and pieces of that are not just on a city or a nonprofit. You get into much more bigger systems things that are more difficult to solve.
Other questions?
Lance Henning, Habitat for Humanity. A friendly panel that has lots of great words towards housing when you talk about housing attainability and you hear about density and housing of all sizes and all types on there. The reality across the community in the metro area when you start thinking about the actions and the rubber hits the road is those aren't always acceptable and friendly across the community. And so how do we kind of break down some of those barriers so that it is acceptable to have housing of all sizes and all types, and even taking away some of the emphasis of the architectural so that we have houses that workforce housing can afford. And so how do we break some of those barriers down and make that acceptable?
Are you talking a lot about the not in my neighborhood kinds of
Yeah,
attitudes?
you see the NIMBY,
Yep.
but you also see different communities that say, hey, density is not for us, or housing of certain sizes is not for us. So how do we break down through some of those barriers and make that acceptable across the community, the whole metro area?
Well, and I'll argue it's always education, and that's honestly what's going to motivate. I'm going to guess all of us here, and we work with in a lot of cities, and we talk to a lot of councils, and I always encourage cities to have that conversation off deal. It's very difficult to have on deal because emotions are up, shields are up. We're not really listening. We're just waiting for you to stop talking so we can explain to you why you're wrong. But it's education. It starts with your leaders. Your leaders have to understand, and I'm going to argue that's why the business community, y'all have to understand what we pay our employees. And I'll tell you, you've chatted with one of those people today. Whatever you did today, because I'm guaranteeing that you either gave your most prized possession to one of those people, and if your daycare bill went up, you'd be mad, or it's the nice lady that trims your dog's hair, or y'all went through Starbucks today. But where do those people live? Because you want restaurants, right? We want the restaurants, we just don't want those people living in the community because they need to live somewhere else. And so Lance's point is we have to have that because one of the biggest costs of housing is transportation. So if we make them go live, and I don't know where that is, somewhere else, yeah, in Des Moines, yeah, Amber says in Des Moines, that's where we start to drive that. And so you have to make a choice. And, you know, if they're good enough for your daycare lady, they're probably good enough for your neighbor, right? And so it's having those conversations. We all need to be educated, so I hope y'all go out and talk to whoever your friends are over beers tonight, or your employers, because it's having those conversations, not over a deal, and understanding who those people are. Who are those people? They can be your neighbors, and it is about that. But Frank has a great point. It's also math. A box is a box. And so the more expensive the box, the bigger the problem.
So I guess I'll offer a way that at least the trust fund has begun to look at this. Kris is exactly right. We have to be having these conversations now and very broadly, instead of the time that the developer is standing at the podium arguing with the council about, and been there, done that, by the way, about a project in particular with a lot of neighbors with torches and pitchforks. I will tell you that if you ask most folks whether or not they think someone that works in a particular city, and I'll pick on Pleasant Hill because Ben's sitting next to me, and he's heard this before. If someone works in Pleasant Hill, do you think that that person ought to be able to live in Pleasant Hill or find a place that they could live in Pleasant Hill that they can afford? And most folks, even some of the toughest NIMBYs, will say, well, yeah. If that person works here, they ought to be able to find a place. So if you're beginning to talk about a broad housing policy in your community, you need to be looking first at your workforce. And let's figure out, can folks that work here find places to live here if they want to? And that should be your first target, and in my mind, the foundation for whatever plan you put together. And I think then you start to see things grow organically instead of with just sort of arbitrary figures about we need this many units at this price and that many units at this other price. You actually are looking at something real. And so, and it also makes the sales job, I think, easier. And if the council decides in its strategic planning session that that's going to be the principle of whatever community it is, then when the project comes up and the neighbors start to come out, because they will, you can say, listen, we had this discussion a year and a half ago, and this is our policy, and this particular project fits it. And I think it then gives some backbone or some backstop to folks that have to face the firing squad, so to speak.
I'll make one quick thing before I forget. I would encourage folks to understand the costs. You know, what does those boxes cost? You know, what does additional brick? What does a basement? What does a garage? Those costs are going up every day, but just the base cost, you should understand, anybody that's in a leadership position, what that box costs and the corresponding sales price to it.
So Ben, how have you had any experience in the residents not wanting some types of developments in their neighborhoods or city?
Yes, of course. So a couple of things that we've done is, I think, is to make it personal. That we've used Eric and his team to come out and work with our staff and elected officials on their kind of Know Your Neighbor campaign. Who are these people? Who lives there? To Kris's point about it's your daycare provider, it's the person who just served you lunch. And is it okay if they walk 2 miles back someplace else to go home every night, or should they be able to live there? But making it personal, putting a face to it, and showing that these are also teachers and law enforcement and firefighters that are all in those same pieces of the market. And then to the NIMBY part of it, that is just real, and it's local, it's national, it's just here. But having a plan, having something that you can go back to, here is why that councils every day are faced with that, making really hard decisions. But it's about being educated, understanding the why do we need this, and being able to translate that, and then using that economic development argument. If you want more of these other things, we need to also have that. And the way that the property tax structure is in Iowa that if you're not growing, you are dying. And so we have to have something new every year, and it's better if it's dense.
So one of the things residents continually say when they don't want a development or a project near them is that it's going to reduce their property values. How would you, any of you, address that?
The reality is that it doesn't, and so we're
False.
that it's perception, and perception is reality to the consumer out there, but it is not true. It's the same as parks and other amenities that, oh, I don't want a park next door, but I want a park in my community. I don't want a trail in front of me, but I want the trail in my community. A much bigger conversation about why.
Okay. Another question?
Eric, you kind of touched on it about the jobs that we're bringing and what they're paying and how that doesn't match what the housing we have available. Have you seen any other regions or states or places where they have tied how they've bridged that gap with the employers that are coming to the market? Say, here's your share of what it would cost to house your employees.
There have been communities that have tried it. Seattle tried that with who am I trying to say? Facebook. And Facebook, right. Microsoft, I'm sorry, yeah, Microsoft. And of course, Microsoft then threatened to pull up stakes and leave. But on the other hand, I think that, and again, that was part of that was because it was a tax. It was a stick instead of a carrot. And so, but I think that you do start to see employers investing large, huge amounts of money in housing, in affordable housing, in some of the places where they have a large workforce, and particularly where housing has gotten just so far out of reach for everybody. Like in the Silicon Valley and other such places. But I guess my argument or my request is let's do that before things get out of control. I mean, we can step in now. We have the really, really big advantage of not having a huge catch-up. We have some catch-up, yes, but not like other places in the country. And so let's learn from their experiences and figure out ways that we can avoid some of those things. So, but yes, there are places. I think Seattle has proven taxes don't work, but I think other places in the country have proven that they can work more carefully with the business community.
One of the things that we're seeing on the residential side is there's a trend moving toward what we would call micro lots, smaller home sites for building. And this is something that I think municipalities are starting to warm up to. They were not very open to it just in the recent years because, I mean, I grew up in Highland Park and I looked up the house that I grew up in. It had a 60-foot frontage. And a 60-foot frontage gets you a little house and you have to drive by it in order to get to the detached garage in the back. And so we don't build new construction that way today. We have these opulent frontages, you know, of 100+ feet in order to build a single-family home. And land today and land prices are one of the key components in the gap between resale and new construction because of the raw land. So anytime that we can go to a smaller frontage home site, you're going to be able to hit that demographic that needs, that would normally buy a townhome. And municipalities, at least in the suburbs, are wanting those houses to be part of an association, which makes it even harder for those individuals to own them because they have to pay another $100 or $150 a month for the lawn care and their snow removal. So it has an effect on affordability based around that. So there's some education that I think needs to happen along those lines to allow a little bit smaller home site.
Thank you. Another question?
Hi, my name is Dan Conley. I'm the Dean of the Business School at Drake. Great discussion. It was said that this is kind of a we problem, that, you know, multiple people have to come together, which I understand. This is certainly complex. But who's the champion? Who's going to lead the we? It's easy when there's a we problem that, well, somebody else is going to take the lead. But somebody's got to be, you know, driving the bus. Who's that going to be? Is that government? Is that the developers? Is that business? Who?
Won't it be the, I'm going to disagree with Eric, but won't it be the people that are coming for the jobs? I mean, you said we should pass on 1,500 jobs and send them to a place with more apartments, but wouldn't, you know, we just completed a neighborhood study where CZB was hired, came in, studied all of our neighborhoods, and concluded that 2/3 or 3/4 of our neighborhoods are declining in value and investment. But shouldn't the invisible hand of more people coming cause more investment to be made and more people wanting to live in the neighborhoods like the Highland Parks, which is one of the neighborhoods that was kind of on the decline? I mean, north of Grand was radically transformed over the last 10 years into a neighborhood where people are making big investments in their houses, and wouldn't that ripple out? So isn't the we somewhat distributed to the customers?
Well, I think that the Des Moines neighborhoods like Highland Park, if we don't build sufficient inventory to meet the needs of that incoming population, will begin on their own. The prices will continue to rise just simply because of the increased demand and lack of supply. But remember, at $30,000, you're not talking about homeowners. And even at $60,000 a year, you're getting pretty close to the top limit of a household that you would look to be a homeowner. So I think that at least as far as the example that I used of the $15 an hour jobs at Amazon, those are truly households that at least many of them will be renters as opposed to homeowners.
Kris, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about multifamily specifically, but what the occupancy rates are kind of looking like. Because I know a lot of projects came online in the last couple of years and a little bit of a slowdown there in the last year or so. Just curious how that's been going so far, because that's obviously a component of this as well.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you know, we're like it is national. You know, for years and years, we didn't do anything because it didn't make sense. We came out of the recession, you know, and we've all had an explosion. And so we in the Des Moines market have brought on unprecedented levels. And so we've just started to come off. And so we just in the third quarter delivered about 1,100 units. Fourth quarter, we delivered about another 700 units. So we have some vacancy now because we have kind of the last kind of big delivery, you know, and this is a slow time of the year. People are always like, oh my gosh, there's vacancy in December. Well, who's going to pack up and move this time of year? I mean, look outside. But what's interesting is we currently have 600 units under construction. There's like 100 in West Des Moines. I mean, unprecedented. And so we're going to see that kind of level off. I mean, you know, my favorite statistic, and I'm kind of a numbers person, but there was 302 permits last year in Des Moines for multifamily, and Hubbell's name was on every single one of them. And Hubbell, that's great. It's a little scary because there isn't anybody else out here. So we will have 600 units come online, which is unprecedented low for us. So I think you're going to see it start to stabilize, but the reality is almost all of those are market rate units. I mean, we're just not bringing on those affordable. So the good news is we're giving another level of housing that's been very well received. They're leasing up well, but there's not that next wave coming on. We don't have those additional ones. But the reality is all of those numbers, almost every single one of them was subsidized, including all the downtown stuff. Our multifamily stuff is all subsidized downtown because the numbers don't work at the market rate level, let alone affordable. So,
one of the things I've read is that there would be more attainable housing if people that are 55 and older would move out of their houses. But where are those folks going to move to, and are they going to be able to afford those types of housing? Go ahead, Frank.
I don't think that I've got a good answer because the housing that I'm developing for 55 and over is only attainable to a narrow slice. It's very, very expensive. The clientele that we're serving wants the following things, which I think is generally true of downsizers. They want indoor-outdoor living. That means a balcony that's bigger than 4'11", so you got to sprinkle it. They want pets, so they want generally want a lot of light. So you've got to put some metal in the walls to support all the windows you're going to put there. They want a very nice kitchen for entertaining, so you've got a nice big granite countertop. They want lots of storage, so there's going to be even more kitchen cabinets than normal. They want a very nice, stylish. They're looking for condominium style living. They want 1,300 square feet at a minimum if they're downsizing from a house. That's like a magic number, 1,300 feet. Well, 1,300 feet is pretty high rent. It's going to be at least $1.50, and it might be $2. So you start to do the math, and you said you're trapped in your home. So we're doing great at 4,000 Ingersoll. We've leased 21 of 25 units. We're really proud of that. And we've rented all the biggest units, and it's very affluent people who are renting these units. So I don't think that there's an easy answer because the product that when you build to what they actually want to code, it's expensive. Now we'll say that we acquired the Imperial, and that's elevator served over parking, walking distance to Dolls, or rather a Price Chopper, and so we're trying to figure out how to convert students to non-students, and kind of to our surprise, we're getting some empty nesters. So it may be that we back into an affordable senior project that we weren't planning on, but it may be that there's a little bit of that goes on.
And kind of related to that, I'm going to put Kris on the spot, that we've talked about these things a little bit, that as we look at multifamily, it is not just who you might think it is that's there, but maybe, Kris, if you could talk about who actually lives in your new stuff.
Yeah, we talk about that a lot, because everybody assumes they're 22. Average age, and we have 10,000 units in our portfolio. Average age. Any guesses? 46. Average age for the renters? 35. Average. Because, yeah, well, but it's going up because of that. So, that's what I think is interesting is we do have exactly what Frank just said, it is, and that's where they're going. Because we're not creating housing at that level. So y'all aren't running out and buying a 300 or 400,000, hell, you got one of those already. So we're not creating that, but they're also seeing the benefit that the millennials see in the rental. Because when they want to go see the grandkids, they just lock it up and go. But they also like to walk over to the restaurant. They like to do all that same kind of thing. So we're seeing, especially our downtown stuff, we're seeing a ton of empty nesters in there. Our highest age is an 83-year-old. I haven't met the lady, but I'm gonna, because I want to hear her story. I love that. But I have met a lot of these people downtown, and they love the downtown lifestyle. So it's not just it is the 22-year-old. It's still, we still have a lot of those, but we're seeing that recycle come back into the other end. So it goes again back to that education. When we talk about, oh my goodness, we're bringing apartments to your community, it's doing exactly what you're saying. How do you turn those? Because we can't build those houses, but if you can turn those entry-level houses, but people still want to stay in that, it's a win-win.
So we have time for one more question from the audience.
Ross Ritter, City of Pleasant Hill, City Council. I promise Ben did not plant me here. I really appreciate the conversation around wages and employment and tying that to housing. But between the job site and your house, there's a trip. And we haven't really addressed public transit at all, and I'm curious what's being done to think about development in a way that ties it into the public transit system so we're not placing additional burdens on our already cash-strapped service.
Well, from the trust fund standpoint, we look at that really closely when we decide which projects to invest in. So the fact is that we also, as everybody's aware, and developers are certainly aware, we have limited resources in order to invest to help make multifamily housing more attainable. And the access to public transportation, and not just one bus in the morning and one bus in the evening, but access to good public transportation with regular service is very important in our decisions in what projects to invest in, as particularly those developers that, like my friend to my right, who work a lot on Route 60, know that we highly value projects that are in that corridor of best service in the region.
I just have a quick question to throw in there. We've talked about Frank and what he's doing in Kading Properties. Are there some other developers that are getting involved into the affordable space, and or what? We've talked about some of the barriers, but I'm just curious why maybe there aren't more folks getting into that realm if there is ultimately some demand there.
I'm describing Kading as affordable with a lowercase a. They don't participate in any government programs. They just build a very economical, highly efficient. I'm not a representative of Kading. I see them around and I'm impressed because they deliver a lot of value for, I think, like a rent of $800 or $900. It's a very, very affordable product. But I don't know of anyone else besides them that's doing new construction at those price points. I could be wrong.
And I think that more developers will get into that price point because it's really we've been really lucky coming out of the recession in terms of, or our builders have been really lucky coming out of the recession, particularly in the first decade or so. And that is they've been building in a very profitable, very comfortable price point for them, and there's been a market for that. And so, people don't do on things that are new or uncomfortable unless they can't do things that are easy and comfortable. So I think we're getting to a point where if you want to continue in the construction business, you're going to have to take a look at the market that is really being served or needs to be served.
I want to go back to the question about housing and transportation, if I can, for just a second. One of the things that the city of Des Moines identified with their latest comprehensive plan a few years ago was just that intersection and the need to build denser housing along corridors where transit already exists so that we can support the transit network and also make it easier for those who need to use it to access it. And so they have codified that now in the new zoning code, which I realize has been a hot button issue for many. But one of the things that it has done is rezoned property along a lot of those major corridors where the transit routes are located to make multifamily development doable by right. So there are less hurdles for a developer to jump through in order to do that. There are still, of course, some challenges with land assembly and some of those other things, but trying to encourage that and make it easier to do.
So just want to wrap up and just ask everybody their final thoughts and what you want everybody here to take, one thing away from this.
Well, I'm going to go back to where I started. I'm going to ask each one of you to go have this conversation with your peeps. And, who is that? I don't know, it's over beers, it's with your employer. A, ask the question. B, understand. Understand. We all, I will tell you, most of us live in one of the biggest subsidies that the U.S. government does. Y'all write off your mortgage interest. Literally one of the biggest ones we have. And so we all started somewhere. I mean, none of us came out of college with we all lived in affordable housing, or if you didn't, you lived in when you were in college. I mean, I had a crappy apartment up in Ames. Understand that, but please have that conversation so it's comfortable, we understand it, so as we approach it, and you'll all run into it somewhere. Thank you for all of you taking the time out of your day today, but please have the conversation beyond this room. Ask questions, talk to your neighbors, talk to your employers, talk to your friends, talk to your elected officials. Because at the end of the day, it has to become policy. For those of us that work in this every single day, it's tougher and tougher and tougher and tougher. So we need better policy decisions, we need better leadership, but have the conversation outside this room.
And to add on to that, it's a complicated issue, right? You can come at it from a lot of different angles. I think just one closing thought from my perspective is on the affordability front or the attainability front, new construction isn't the only part of the solution. We also need to look at existing housing as part of that solution because it will naturally become more affordable over time. And so the question is, how do we continue to reinvest in that existing housing, whether it's apartment buildings or single family, so that it still continues to offer a good quality living environment and doesn't become affordable because it's substandard?
I think you make it personal. One of the things we did with our elected officials and leadership staff was, as an icebreaker in a conversation, tell your housing story. You know, where did you live? Where did you grow up? What was your neighborhood like? What did you like about it? What did you not like about it? And what's interesting is it's different for everybody. Everybody's had a different experience, but to everybody, it is very personal. And then you learn that people that you might never suspect, of course, they lived in affordable housing or subsidized housing, or, you know, and meet with your group of people and raise your hand. Did anybody never live in multifamily housing in your housing career? And just start to understand that there are different points and pieces of it for everybody, and that once you've made it to the 2,000-foot ranch, that's not recognized that not everybody's going to do that, and a monoculture of ranches across our community is not sustainable.
Plan. So as we go forward now, or at least the trust fund goes forward with the workforce housing study and what will shortly be coming out as a report on the strategies to address that workforce housing study, the one underlying foundational thing that we're going to be asking of all communities is to get a housing plan. Get it written down. Some communities have already done that. Pleasant Hill has a housing plan that they just work through. But get the plan, get it on paper, decide what your principles are going to be as a community, and then begin to talk about strategies to execute. But make sure that we're not just following the old rule that we've followed, frankly, in Central Iowa for far too long, which is, well, the market will decide. Because the market won't do it. We need plans here to make sure that we have the kinds of housing that that folks need and that's attainable.
I think the one thing I could say that's contributed to a little bit of a decrease of NIMBYism is that we've given the choice between trying to plow forward with a neighborhood or approach the neighborhood. We've generally tended to approach the neighborhood earlier rather than later. I think that sometimes has backfired. I can think of a few very poignant examples of that backfiring dramatically, but for the most part, I think it's a good plan. And they generally give you, generally there's some kernel of truth to all of the neighborhood objections, and if you can, it's sometimes very difficult, but if you can consider that to be free advice and sometimes make your project better as a result, then you can mitigate the NIMBYism and also potentially wind up with a more marketable project. That's happened to us recently several times.
I really liked what Kris said about being able to write off the interest on your mortgage and having that tax deduction. And if there's anything, as far as a piece of advice for the room, own real estate. Own real estate, make your payment, retire the debt, and it's probably one of the single biggest ways that the normal, everyday, average Joe working for their money can build wealth in this country. And it's done on the long game. It's not a short game. It's not a quick hit. It isn't a get-rich-quick scheme, but it's a great way to build wealth into your retirement.
If only I was handy, I would take that advice for you, but I cannot do any of those things to fix up a house, so it would cost me more money, I think. That's going to do it for us today. We've got a couple things I want to let you know about that we've got coming up. Our economic forecast event on January 29th. We're just about out of space for that, but there might be a few tickets left, so if you get a chance, go ahead and get signed up for that. Our next Power Breakfast event is on February 13th. We're going to be taking a look at some of the challenges in that space right now. There's a lot of projects underway and a lot of asks in the community, and so trying to take a little deep look into that. Our next newsroom event is going to be on March 11th. We don't have the topic set yet for that. That's one that we try to keep loose and fluid so that we can react to things going on in the community. And then our annual or commercial real estate forum that is going to be in mid-April as well, so we'll have some information coming out on that in probably about a month or so. So if you enjoyed today's conversation, we'll be going deeper into a variety of different topics related to real estate and development. I also want to thank today we had about 12 new members to the Business Record join us today. That's one of the efforts that we use this series for, is to help and bring new people into the fold. So if you're a brand new Business Record member, we're glad to have you. We're excited for you to get to see all the great things that hopefully we're going to be able to help bring for you so that you can do your business better. If you're an existing member and you know somebody that you think should be benefiting from coming to these events or getting our products or our e-newsletters, Jason Swanson is going to be, he's been helping. Jason, where are you? Behind him? Jason, big wave from back behind. Jason's in charge of audience development for the Business Record. He's going to be reaching out your way with an offer so that you can help bring somebody else into the fold as well. Lastly, our best story ideas always come from the people in the audience. So we could barely scratch the surface today of a lot of the topics. So if something today sparked a thought for you, Kathy is always available. Our editorial staff is always looking for story ideas, for things for us to keep on talking about and keep on writing about so that we can help keep educating the community about housing in the region. Lastly, can I get a big round of applause today for our panels? Thank you all for coming. Thanks again to US Cellular for sponsoring, and drive safely tonight, please. Thank you.